You're not a rebel. You might be a rogue. You're not a stick in the mud. You might be a teacher guardian. You're not some scatterbrained flake that just talks too much and can't stay on task. You may be an evangelist connector. You're not some weirdo that just likes to be alone and think about deep things. God may have created you to be a prophet, a creative that's going to actually envision the kind of future that we live in. And you're not just a goody two shoes, like soft, just, kind of weak person. You may be an amazing shepherd nurturer that God has created to love people so well, to actually show them what it means to be loved by a God who loves us all so well. Everybody, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. So excited to have you back, whether you're listening, watching, whatever it is in the podcast. We're excited to have you as a part of this community. And as we're going chapter by chapter through the death of the dream, resurrecting purpose when life doesn't go as planned. And I just want to take a minute real quick at the beginning of this episode to encourage you. What you're going to hear in these next couple episodes as we're getting a little bit to the latter half of the book, talking a little bit more about discovering your unique purpose and how that's a process of moving into a place of really becoming who you were born to be, to see your specific dream resurrected. One of the greatest journeys that I can encourage you to take is the Spiritual DNA online course. I created this course over the past 15 years through my process. In fact, this episode we're going to talk about, Rogue Not Rebellious, is a part of what really began to turn the corner for me to understand the unique ways that God had created me. And if you don't have that knowledge yet, if you don't have that understanding, if you haven't come to a moment where you say, you know what, I make sense. I have actually been created on purpose and for a purpose. And that purpose is something I'm going to step into as I see the resurrection of my purpose through this process. Spiritual DNA, this would be a perfect time for you to get involved with the course. You just need to go to spiritualdna.me. That's the website. There are 3 different options. You can do a 3-month, a 6-month, or a lifetime access to the course. All the video teaching, the assessments, it's all included. And I would really encourage you, if you don't know that if you haven't had that awakening, that I make sense moment, this would be the perfect time for you to start bringing spiritual DNA as a part of this podcast journey. So spiritualdna.me, go check it out today. We're going to jump into this episode, chapter 12, and we'll start out like this. It comes from page 97 of the book. It's right off the top there of chapter 12. It says this: have you ever felt like you just didn't fit in? And junior high doesn't count. We all felt that way in junior high. Hey, amen or oh me. Hello. Okay. I'm talking about in real life and in your own skin, like you're playing a role you didn't realize isn't really you. And that's a lot of what this chapter unpacks. I've come into a place in my life where things were not making sense, didn't feel right, and I didn't feel like I wasn't right in my own skin. And I joke about this sometimes when I speak, whether it be with corporations or doing some of the spiritual DNA live training. I talk about the idea of, like, what if you were doing a bad impersonation of yourself in life? And I like to have fun with this. I used to do impersonations a little bit more when I was in high school. I could do a pretty good Chris Farley impersonation of him doing Matt Foley. I could do Bill Clinton for a while there. Like, there was a season of life where I was in impersonations, and they're fun for a laugh. They're fun at a party, okay? But they wouldn't work if you were doing them every day in every element of your life. In fact, it would be super awkward and really off-putting. And so I always joke around. It's like, I do a bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation. This is it right here, like this, right? Get down, right? Get in the chopper. Right? It's not good. You're not going to see me doing any kind of like touring on comedy circuits doing impersonations of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I always make this point. Imagine if that was how I actually thought I talked. Right? Like, I have a few gifts and abilities. I can play the drums pretty well. I'm okay here at speaking. Math, we've talked about that, I think, before. Not my jam. Science, really spelling the English language, not a strength. But it is one of the best things I do. One of the things God's created me to do is speak, to communicate. And what if I was trying to do my life, my calling, using the Arnold Schwarzenegger impersonation? I can guarantee you you would not be listening to this podcast after 1 minute of like 6 years ago. You'd been like, no, I've heard some things about this Daron Earlewine guy, but this is not my jam. Because I'd be like, created on purpose, for purpose. You'd be like, bro, come on. What are you doing? Right? My marriage wouldn't work. I can't go on dates, talk to my wife like that. I couldn't parent. Give me a break. You serious? Like be telling my kids, do your homework. They'd be like, Dad, we know it's a fake voice. My life wouldn't work, and neither would yours. I don't care if you're doing Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever impersonation you do poorly. If you weren't using your actual voice to live your life wouldn't function. And what I want to dig into today is there are what I believe 5 unique callings or voices within God's kingdom. And he has created you on purpose to speak one of those, to lead in a way. That's who you are in God's kingdom. And if you don't know that voice, you might be doing a bad impersonation of yourself. And that may be a little bit of why your life's not working. That's where I was at in this season of my life. And this season of my life kind of coincides with the last episode we did talking about the season when I was pastoring a church plant here in the Indianapolis area. And it was an amazing time, the first really 3 years. It was new. We were starting something from scratch. There was a lot of pioneering and more what we call apostolic type of work. I loved it. I felt totally alive. We were reaching people that no one else was reaching. And for those first 3-4 years, I loved it. It felt like me. And then we got into a season where there had to be a lot of management. There really needed to be a lot of shepherding and pastoral care and follow-up and systems and structures because we had hundreds of people showing up. And it got to the place where I was trying my best to be someone that I really wasn't. I was outside my gifts, my strengths, my abilities, and it led me to a really weak place. And that contributed to a lot of the weird stuff that happened in my life, the unfortunate things that I wish I could change. And that may be a season that you have had where you chased after a dream maybe and you were like, man, the first 3-5 months or years, it was great. But then I just couldn't get out of my own way and things began to fall apart. If you've walked through that, like I've walked through that, it's an amazing opportunity for learning. And I think you begin to see that you may have lack in one of 3 areas. They break down to this: information, okay, identity, or imagination. One or all 3 of these are areas that you probably have a lack in, a lack of information, a lack of understanding of identity, or a lack of imagination. I want to walk through that in this episode to help you kind of get your heart and your mind, your spirit around maybe what God's inviting you into to become who you were born to be. Let's start with the first one. We're going to talk about a lack of information. It was during this season of life, I talk about this in the book, that I stumbled, and literally I remember stumbling upon them. I was on a website, and somehow, like it was like a church planning website or something, and they had some free resources. And there was a tab for this free PDF for this book called Houses That Changed the World. Never heard of it before. Didn't know that there were houses that changed the world. The author had his name Wolfgang Simpson, which I thought was a freaking awesome name. And I liked the name Wolfgang because Eddie Van Halen named his son Wolfgang. So I was like, all of this intriguing, plus it's free. So I download this free PDF and start reading it. And what Wolfgang Simpson begins to unpack is the first hundreds, maybe 300 to 400 years of Christianity, of these house churches all over the world that literally did turn the world upside down. This was some information in a season. I even took church history in college. I don't remember being taught this stuff. I don't remember seeing this as a crucial part of the growth of Christianity. And it began to expand my understanding and my knowledge base of how God works and how I might be invited into that process. Shortly after, I discovered another book I talk about this in the book, in my book, by Alan Hirsch, one of my favorite authors, called The Forgotten Ways. And where he begins to unpack some of this understanding of these 5 callings that come from Ephesians chapter 4. And this was knowledge. I was ignorant of all this, right? And when you have a lack of knowledge, it's not that you're dumb. You're not stupid, right? You're just ignorant. There's just information that you don't know, that you've never learned, that you need to discover to be able to step into that next level of calling. And so as I read Houses That Changed the World and The Forgotten Ways, my eyes began to be open, and I realized I have some learning to do that could bring some insight and some illumination on what's going on in my life and where I may be missing the boat, right? In page 97, I say this in the book: these books revealed to me that what I had always assumed was an obedience problem was actually an imagination problem and also an information problem. I think it's true for most of us. It's not that we wouldn't follow Jesus where he wants to lead us. It's that we can't actually imagine where he's leading. We have a deficit of imagination. Now, the good news about this, and I unpack this in the book, is Jeremiah 33:3. I love this passage of scripture. It says this: this is God's message. The God who made the earth, made it livable and lasting, known everywhere as God. This is what he says: call to me and I will answer you. I will tell you marvelous and wondrous things that you could never figure out on your own. What an invitation. He is asking us to call on him. He is promising us that he will tell us marvelous and wonderful things. I mean, how awesome is that? So here's the promise. If you're at a place where there's information about yourself, about life, about the industry that you're in, about relationships, or whatever it is in your life, you go, you know what? There are just things that I don't know that I know that I need to learn. Here's the cool part. You're not alone in this pursuit. We can call out to God and he will reveal wonderful and marvelous things that we could never figure out on our own. Because see, to become the person that God's created you and me to be, we have to be informed by divine knowledge. We have to allow the truth of God to guide and direct us. Now, one of the greatest places to find that is the Word of God. That's a discipline issue, all right? A pattern of your life, a rhythm of your life. If you're not regularly in the Bible, whether you're listening to it, whether you're singing along to it, whether you're reading it, studying it in a group of folks that are going through Bible studies, if you're not regularly studying the Word of God, it's going to be difficult for you to know what God's saying to you and where he's guiding and directing you. That's first and foremost the information you need. As you're growing into your purpose, though, it's very important that you begin to understand who God's created you to be, as we're going to unpack a little bit more, and then dive into understanding all you can about that calling and about the gifting that he's given you. That information gap needs to close up, okay? Now, here's the next thing. Identity. You may have a lack of identity. Now, this is foundational to everything in our life. And one of the things that breaks my heart and actually angers me is how early on in life I feel like our enemy, the devil, begins to take attack at the calling that God has placed in our life. I experienced this in my life. If we had a chance to sit down and share stories, I'm sure you have some stories of your own. And even Joseph that we walk through in the book had the same issues, okay? Here's the deal. I believe that early on in life, the devil usually starts to attack, to damage, or to distort our understanding, our sense of purpose, calling, and identity. You look at Joseph, right? Joseph steps up. We think he's in his late teens at this point, comes to his brothers, right? I had a dream. He told it to his brothers. They hated him all the more. He's like, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose up, stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers are mad. What, you tend to reign over us? What's the deal? We've already gone through this story, but that's his dream. What I think is interesting is later on when they actually begin to plot to kill and then to sell Joseph into slavery, we skip down into verse 19, and this is what his brothers say, right, to each other. They see him coming off at a distance, and they say, here comes that dreamer. And in that, what I see is, and maybe this has happened for you, is Joseph was a dreamer. God had the dream he had, right, was from God. God had called him and equipped him to be an amazing leader of people and of countries. We see that actually came, to pass in his life. But here he is in his teen years, right? And his brothers mocking his actual calling. Oh, here comes that dreamer. And there may be a moment in your life as you look back where you say, you know what? My parents, my friends, people in my life, they've always doubted me. They've always kind of mocked me for my uniqueness, right? Maybe for you, you're super detail-oriented people, and everything for you is lists and tasks and follow-through process, and you're always trying to systematize and structure things. And maybe when you were a little kid, everybody was like, "Oh, here she comes," you know what I mean, Mrs. List. Oh, everything's got to be structured. Mr. Wet Blanket, he's got all the questions. Or for you, maybe it was that you were, gifted creatively. and you love to be alone and to think deeply, and you maybe even have an artistic bend to you in that. And people maybe have mocked that when you were a little kid. Maybe you got teased at school and early on in life that you were weird, or why do you want to be alone, or why do you guys always got to be, why did you always feel so sad and serious? I'm guessing if we sat down very early on, there's something where you were attacked or somewhat mocked for your uniqueness. My story, one that kind of resonates with that idea, here comes the dreamer with Joseph, is I was a little kid. I want to say I was, I don't know, probably 7, 8, maybe younger. I'm not sure. It was a Christmas. And this Christmas, my grandparents and all my aunts and uncles, we had a pretty big family on my mom's side, and they thought it'd be really funny if everybody got kind of a comic, like a T-shirt with like a cartoon character that kind of represented, their look or whatever. And so I can remember we got there, and all the cousins are around. We're doing the big Christmas deal, and we open up our presents, and my brother, more of an introvert, very, very smart, loved to be alone and study and practice guitar. And like, that was his jam. And it led him to be brilliant in a lot of things that he's done in his life. But my brother opens his, and it's kind of this dorky looking kid with his nose and, finger in his nose. And it says, "I love homework," and everybody, ha ha, it's funny. He loves homework. So I'm opening mine. I'm excited. Like, man, I wonder what everybody thinks about me. This is so great. And everybody's looking. I mean, you can just see it, right? Big Christmas. Everybody's staring at me. Open my present, and it's this kid, like mischievous looking kid, like with a bunch of broken stuff and just a mess everywhere around it. And it says, "Here comes trouble." And I open it, everybody thinks it's hilarious. Everybody laughed and I started crying, because here I am, a little kid, and I never had seen myself as trouble. Like, yeah, I could stir it up a little bit, right? Maybe I was a little rebellious sometimes, but I had never taken that on, and I had never seen that other people in my family may have thought of me that way. And I feel terrible whenever I talk to this story about with my grandma. Like, she feels so terrible. Like, and I'm sorry, we crushed you, Daron. And I'm like, listen, God redeemed it. But for you, maybe there's been a moment that, for me, what I realized is that it was a joking thing, but that did actually take a hit at a little bit of who God's created me to be, which I want to unpack for you in a little more detail here. But very early on in life, the enemy has been coming at your sense of identity. And what I want to let you know is, as you walk this resurrection to purpose, is God wants to redeem, and he wants to begin to bring you into focus to understand who you are and who you are because of who you are in him. What I had to discover as I unpack in this chapter is I wasn't trouble, and I wasn't a rebel, but I was created by God to be a rogue. And when I began to understand that identity, everything began to change. And so unpacking a damaged or distorted sense of calling and identity in your life, it's not a small task. And this is not like an overnight project. You're going to watch the podcast, say a prayer, poof, now you totally get it. This may take you a while. And I also want to encourage you, this is not something that you probably discover and unpack. And if you have a damaged sense of identity, find healing in that as a solo mission. You're going to need help, probably from a good Christian counselor, biblical counselor, potentially from a pastor or somebody in your life that speaks into that, and in a group of people that believe in you, that love you, and can help you see what maybe you haven't been able to see yet in your life. But don't fret about how quickly that needs to happen. We've talked about it before, right? God's not in a hurry in your life, but he is ready to meet you and to bring healing to that sense of identity if he needs to. And so one of the kind of life-changing moments for me on this, and I want to share this story. It's in the book, and I want to say it in person. You can obviously read it in the book, but I remember I was actually here in our studio space, and my friend Micah was coming through town. He said, "Hey, I got about an hour. Could we hang out?" And completely unplanned, unstructured, just organically happened one day. And he sits down. He says, "Hey, Daron, we're talking about what we're doing ministry-wise, what he's doing ministry-wise." And he said, "Daron," he said, "man, when you talk," he's like, "I really feel like that God has created you to be a rogue. In fact, I think you're created to be a rogue bee." And he's like, "You think about rogue bees?" And I'm like, "No, I don't do a lot of study in bee life." You know what I mean? And so I don't really think about rogue bees. And he began to explain what I talk about in the book, right? is that 99% of bees are worker bees, right? They do the little bee waggle to communicate to the other bees where the next food source is, where the pollen is, the whole deal. But there are 7 to 9 rogue bees in every hive, and their job is to go outside of the hive, to ignore the worker bee waggle, and go find the next source of food, to go find the future for the beehive. And if 100% of the bees were worker bees, they would eventually die, right? They would lose their food source and they would cease to exist. And we know bees are important. We've all seen the bee movie from Disney, right? Without bees, there's no flowers. And it's a big deal. Without these rogue bees ignoring what everyone else was doing, the hive would eventually cease to exist. The dangerous thing for the rogues is that most of them die in their adventures. But they're not rebellious bees. They're not the bees that are like, hey, dude, if you could just chill out and do the waggle, you know what I mean? Like, no, like God has created them to be rogues so they could create the future for that hive. And as my friend Micah sat down with me and he said, man, Daron, I want you to think about and pray about and see if that may be something that God's saying to you. In that conversation, there was a piece of that unlocked for me, the next level of healing for me to say, you know what? I need to understand that that is a part of my identity. I need to own that, and I need to step into that. One of the phrases or one of the callings that we have from Ephesians chapter 4 to understand that rogue is the calling of an apostle. An apostle, or you might hear it from giant leadership over from the UK, they call it a pioneer. And that's a part of what my identity is. In God's kingdom, I've been created to be a pioneer apostle. And I never knew that. So as I go back to what I talked about here in the first is in those first 3-4 years of church planting for me, I was in a very apostolic pioneering place and things made sense. But I'm not very shepherding. I'm not very nurturing. That's not a part of my calling. And when that was a bigger part of what I needed to do and what was necessary for that church and that organization to grow, I couldn't do it. And it began to make me believe that maybe I wasn't called by God or he didn't have a purpose in my life. And that may be where you've been, is that you just don't know who God's created you to be. Ephesians chapter 4 says that God's gifts he's given to the church are the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers. I believe that your core identity in God's kingdom is one of those 5 callings. Another word we can place with those, right, is pioneer for apostle, creative for a prophet, connector for the evangelist, nurturer instead of shepherd, and guardian instead of teacher. As I'm saying those words, if one of them is jumping off, off the podcast to you, you might need to begin to get a little more curious, and going back to that lack of information, begin to grow your knowledge base on who God may have created you to be. Once again, the Spiritual DNA online course is a great resource for that. You can get it at spiritualdna.me and begin this process of understanding your identity and then gaining more information to know how you step into that, okay? Last thing I want to hit you with is this, is a lack of imagination. Walking with Jesus is the key, okay, to allowing this healing of your heart, your identity to go. But then this next piece is for him to begin to open up your imagination with his divine imagination. In the book, I unpack this and I say it like this. Every one of the dreams I had pursued to this point now made sense. Yes, I wanted to be a rock star and had the ability to play drums, but the thing that drew me most to this vision wasn't just performing music and playing drums. What I loved so much about Stryper and U2 was that they took amazing music and showmanship in a covert, somewhat undercover, pioneering way, and it made a huge impact on the lives of those who were not yet seeking God. My lack of maturity, and I would say even knowledge, an underdeveloped character drew me to people like Tommy Lee from Motley Crue. Rogues, right, which I would say Tommy's a rogue, can easily become rebellious if they don't understand who God has created them to be and how he is inviting us to join him to create the future. A frustrated rogue may just want to get drunk and destroy a hotel room or land a helicopter on someone's front yard. Maybe someday Tommy Lee we'll learn that he's a rogue too, not a rebel. Maybe there's a chance we'll still rock out together after all. Continue on, it says this. I'm so thankful that upon my exit from the crux, there were people who embraced me in my rogue, pioneering, apostolic spirit. Every decision from that point in my life was made with this understanding of myself, and I no longer felt like I was living someone else's dream or that there was something wrong with me. I mean that. It's from that point, that was the filter by which I made every decision professionally and personally in my life, and it's made a massive impact in my life. I don't want you to waste another moment of your life thinking there's something wrong with you. God not only put dreams inside us, but he custom designed us to fulfill those dreams. Don't waste another day playing someone else's role in the story of your life. I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and I hope you hear that. It's so important that you step into this and say, God, open my imagination to understand how this identity and this level of information that I need can move me forward into becoming who you created me to be. You're not a rebel. You might be a rogue. You're not a stick in the mud. You might be a teacher guardian. You're not some scatterbrained flake that just talks too much and can't stay on task. You may be an evangelist connector. You're not some weirdo that just likes to be alone and think about deep things. God may have created you to be a prophet, a creative that's going to actually envision the kind of future that we live in. And you're not just a goody two shoes, like soft, just, kind of weak person. You may be an amazing shepherd nurturer that God has created to love people so well, to actually show them what it means to be loved by a God who loves us all so well. If this is hitting with you, you got to jump into the process. Don't waste another day living someone else's version of your life. You were created on purpose and for a purpose, and I can't wait to see you step into it. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Would love to get your feedback. As always, you can email me, Daron@blackbirdmission.com. Reach out to me on the socials, Facebook, Instagram. We're on TikTok now. Just search my name. It's out there. Or you can send me a text if you'd like, 317-550-5070. Hey, until that point, remember these three things. God's created you on purpose and for a purpose. I've already said that one. He's near you, not far, and he's for you, not against you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Daron Earlewine Podcast. Talk to you guys next time.